In May 2002, three young women in Cleveland, Ohio, were kidnapped by Ariel Castro, a man who would keep them captive for years in his home. The women, Michelle Knight, Amanda Berry, and Gina DeJesus, were each abducted at different times, with no one suspecting that a single man was behind their disappearances. For years, their families feared the worst, with no clues and no leads. Ariel Castro, a former school bus driver, appeared to be a normal man in the community, but behind closed doors, he was a monster. He kept these women locked in his home, isolated and subjected to unimaginable horrors. For years, their names would be added to a list of missing persons, with no one knowing their fate. Then, on May 6, 2013, Amanda Berry made a daring escape. After more than a decade of captivity, she broke free from the chains that bound her and screamed for help. A neighbor heard her cries and called the police, leading to the rescue of Amanda, Michelle, and Gina. Their escape was nothing short of miraculous. Ariel Castro was arrested and charged with numerous crimes, including kidnapping, rape, and more. He was sentenced to life in prison, but just a month later he took his own life. The courage of these three women has inspired millions, showing the world the strength of the human spirit. Despite the horrors they endured, Michelle, Amanda, and Gina rebuilt their lives and found hope. Their story is one of survival, resilience, and a reminder that even in the darkest of times, there is always a way out. Michelle Knight was just 21 years old when her life was turned upside down in 2002. She had grown up in a turbulent environment, facing personal struggles and challenges from a young age. Michelle had always been a resilient individual, though life hadn't always been easy. As a young adult, she found herself dealing with the fallout of a difficult childhood. She was estranged from her family and, at the time of her abduction, was living on her own. Michelle had dreams of bettering her life and building a future, but those dreams were shattered when Ariel Castro lured her into his vehicle. She was abducted under false pretenses, and she would never see the outside world for over a decade. But even during her captivity, Michelle's inner strength never wavered. Despite being the longest-held captive, she would go on to play a crucial role in the survival of the other women, offering them a sense of hope and protection in the darkest of times. Amanda Berry was only 16 years old when she was abducted in 2003. She had been working at a fast food restaurant and was looking forward to a bright future. Amanda lived with her mother, and the two had a close relationship. Her mother, Lynn, was a source of comfort and love for Amanda, always encouraging her to pursue her dreams. But everything changed the day Amanda accepted a ride from Ariel Castro. That was the last time she would see her mother or the outside world for more than a decade. While in captivity, Amanda's family was devastated by her disappearance. The search for her lasted for years, and her mother tragically passed away in 2006, still believing that her daughter would come home. Amanda's abduction not only took a toll on her, but on the entire Berry family. They fought tirelessly for answers, never losing hope. And for Amanda, this was the tragic backdrop of her experience, knowing her mother died without ever seeing her again. However, Amanda's story would ultimately become one of survival and resilience, as she would later make an astonishing escape that would change everything. Gina DeJesus was only 14 years old when she was abducted in 2004, just 1 year after Amanda's disappearance. Gina was a typical teenager, full of life, joy, and the energy of youth. She was active in her school and loved spending time with her family and friends. Gina had dreams, like so many other teenagers, of a bright future. She was walking home from school on the day she was abducted, just like she had done many times before. But Ariel Castro was waiting. He kidnapped Gina and trapped her in his home, continuing the cycle of abuse and isolation that he had inflicted on Michelle and Amanda. Her family, particularly her father, Felix DeJesus, was devastated by her disappearance. Gina's family never gave up hope. They kept searching for her every single day. They held vigils, spread flyers, and worked with the police to find any trace of her. Felix made it his life's mission to keep searching for Gina, and through the years, his love for his daughter and his unwavering belief that she was still alive kept the hope alive for the entire community. Gina's abduction was not just a personal tragedy. It was a community tragedy. But her family, especially her father, always held out hope, and they were never willing to let go of the belief that one day Gina would return. Each of these three women, Michelle Knight, Amanda Berry, and Gina DeJesus, had their own unique lives and dreams before being violently torn away from their families. They were daughters, sisters, and friends, each with their own stories, struggles, and hopes. Their disappearances devastated their families, and for years, the search for them seemed hopeless. But even during the darkest years of captivity, each woman found strength in their own way. They survived against unimaginable odds, and their stories of resilience would one day bring them back home. This is a story of loss, but it is also one of unwavering hope and of families who refused to stop looking, even when the world told them to give up. It's a story that reminds us all of the power of love, strength, and the human spirit, and how even in the face of despair, we can always find the strength to survive. Ariel Castro may have seemed like a regular, even well-respected man to those around him. Born in 1960, Castro grew up in Puerto Rico and moved to the United States as a young man. He eventually settled in Cleveland, Ohio, where he began to build a life that would outwardly appear to be successful. He became a school bus driver, a job that many in the community trusted. In fact, to the outside world, he was a seemingly upstanding member of society, known for his work transporting children safely to and from school every day. Castro had a family. He was married with children of his own. His life appeared normal, and he fit the mold of a man who lived in the suburbs, raised a family, and earned a living like so many others. Those who knew him had no idea about the dark secrets hidden behind the closed doors of his home. He blended into the fabric of his community, keeping his true self a closely guarded secret. However, beneath the facade of the school bus driver and family man, there was a much darker side to Ariel Castro. His personality and behaviors reflected a man driven by deep-seated control and manipulation. Over the years, it became clear that Castro was a man with a dangerous obsession for power, particularly over women. He had a history of abusive relationships that should have raised red flags for anyone paying close attention. In the years leading up to the kidnappings, Castro had been involved in several turbulent relationships. His former partners reported instances of physical and emotional abuse, where Castro displayed an alarming desire to control and dominate his girlfriends. One of his ex-partners even described how he would manipulate situations to keep her isolated from her friends and family, a tactic that would foreshadow the manipulation he would later use to abduct and hold his victims captive. While his ex-partners tried to break free from his clutches, Castro's behavior continued to escalate. His need for control grew, and his actions became more erratic and dangerous. But it wasn't until 2002, when he began his pattern of abduction, that the full extent of his twisted desires would be revealed. Ariel Castro's method of luring his victims into his home was chillingly manipulative. He knew how to gain the trust of vulnerable women. He would exploit their weaknesses, often pretending to be someone they could trust. For instance, he abducted Michelle Knight in 2002, using the promise of help after she was involved in a legal dispute and appeared to be in a vulnerable state. Castro offered her a ride, a simple and seemingly harmless gesture that ultimately led to her being locked in his basement. In 2003, Castro abducted Amanda Berry, a 16-year-old girl who had been working at a fast food restaurant. He approached her while she was walking home from work, offering her a ride, just as he had done with Michelle. Amanda was trusting and unaware of the monster behind the wheel of the car. What seemed like a harmless favor would turn into years of unimaginable horror. A year later, in 2004, he abducted Gina DeJesus, a 14-year-old girl who was walking home from school. Just as with Michelle and Amanda, Castro used his seemingly innocent gestures of kindness to trick Gina into his vehicle. Once inside, she, too, would never see freedom again. What made these abductions even more horrifying was how Ariel Castro operated. He kept his victims hidden in the basement of his home, isolated from the world. For years, the women were subjected to unimaginable physical and psychological abuse. Castro's tactics were designed to break their spirits, control their minds, and make them feel like they had no hope of ever escaping. But even more disturbing than the initial abductions was how Castro manipulated the entire situation to create a web of lies. He used his knowledge of technology and social media to control the situation from afar. He would send fake messages from the women's phones, creating the illusion that they were alive and making it appear as though they had willingly disappeared. Castro even attempted to use his manipulative behavior on his own family, continuing to maintain the illusion of a normal, functional life to anyone who was close to him. The control Castro exercised over his victims was the culmination of a lifetime of abusive relationships and toxic behavior. His need to dominate, manipulate, and control ultimately led to the kidnapping and captivity of 3 innocent young women, and it was only a matter of time before his horrifying actions would be exposed to the world. For years, Ariel Castro managed to live among the community without suspicion, hiding his darkest desires behind a mask of normalcy. But as we would come to find out, that mask was bound to slip, and when it did, the truth was more horrific than anyone could have imagined. The abductions of Michelle Knight, Amanda Berry, and Gina DeJesus were carried out with disturbing precision. Ariel Castro's ability to manipulate and lure these young women into his home was chilling. Each of their stories began with a seemingly harmless encounter, a moment of vulnerability, but it quickly spiraled into a nightmare that would last for years. Michelle Knight's abduction. It all began in 2002, when Michelle Knight, a 21-year-old woman with a troubled past, was walking to a friend's house in Cleveland. Michelle was struggling with personal issues, including legal battles and the loss of her son to foster care, leaving her in a vulnerable state. Castro, who had been watching her from his car, seized the opportunity. He offered Michelle a ride, promising her that he could help her resolve some of her problems. Once Michelle entered the car, she was immediately driven to Castro's home. There, she was locked in the basement of his house, shackled and isolated from the outside world. The initial shock of being taken captive was only the beginning. She was held in captivity for the longest of the 3 women, enduring unimaginable abuse. For more than a decade, Michelle would remain trapped in the dark, cold basement, often shackled to a wall. She was subjected to physical violence, emotional manipulation, and forced to endure long stretches of isolation. Amanda Berry's abduction. A year later, in 2003, Amanda Berry, just 16 years old at the time, had just finished her shift at a fast food restaurant. She was looking forward to seeing her family and had no idea that her life was about to change forever. While walking home, Amanda was approached by Ariel Castro, who offered her a ride. She, too, trusted Castro, just as Michelle had, unaware of his sinister intentions. As she got into his car, Amanda's nightmare began. Castro quickly drove her to his home, where she was confined to the same basement Michelle had been held in. Amanda's captivity was marked by terror, physical abuse, and a deep sense of isolation. For Amanda, the situation was even more devastating because she had a family that desperately searched for her, especially her mother, who tragically passed away without knowing what had happened to her daughter. Amanda, like Michelle, would endure years of brutal treatment. But as we would later learn, her story would end differently. Amanda would be the one to eventually escape, but the torment she suffered in the meantime was unimaginable. Gina DeJesus' abduction. In 2004, the nightmare continued with the abduction of Gina DeJesus, who was only 14 years old at the time. Gina was walking home from school, just like she had done countless times before, when Ariel Castro pulled up next to her in his car. He told her that he knew her family and that he could offer her a ride. Trusting that he was a familiar face, Gina accepted. As soon as she got into the car, Castro quickly locked the doors and drove her to his home, where she was taken to the same dark, grim basement. Like Michelle and Amanda, Gina was shackled, deprived of food, and subjected to physical and sexual abuse. She was a young girl, scared and alone, in an unfamiliar place, with no way of reaching out for help. Gina's family, especially her mother, never gave up hope during the years of her disappearance, relentlessly searching for her. The pain of not knowing where she was or what had happened to her tore at her family. But Gina, like Michelle and Amanda, was forced to endure a terrifying new reality. The horrors Michelle, Amanda, and Gina faced inside Ariel Castro's home were beyond anything most people could imagine. Locked away in dark, windowless rooms, the women were isolated from the outside world. Castro went to great lengths to control them, using fear, violence, and manipulation to break their spirits. He would often lock them in different rooms of the house, keeping them separated from each other to prevent them from forming any meaningful connection. At times, the women were deprived of basic necessities such as food and water. Castro would withhold meals for days, making them weak and vulnerable. He used his control over their lives to reinforce his power and keep them dependent on him. When they were allowed out of the room, they were still confined to the house, and their every move was watched. Despite the overwhelming abuse, something remarkable happened during their years of captivity. The women formed a bond. They supported each other in small ways, offering words of encouragement when they could. Michelle, the longest held captive, became a sort of protector to Amanda and Gina. They tried to hold on to hope, but it was often difficult. The reality of their situation was crushing, and there were moments when they were certain they would never see the outside world again. However, through it all, they clung to the hope that one day they might escape, that they might be free again. The bond they shared, born out of their shared suffering, became a crucial part of their survival. They didn't give up on each other, and their shared will to survive would eventually lead to their freedom. After years of unimaginable suffering, one fateful moment in May 2013 would change everything. It was a day that began like any other for the women, still held captive in the dark, claustrophobic basement of Ariel Castro's home. However, this day would be different. It would be the day that Amanda Berry found the courage to escape. Amanda had been living in captivity for nearly 10 years, but over the course of that time, she had held onto a small thread of hope, always believing that somehow she would be freed. On this day, Castro had left the house, leaving Amanda alone with the chance she'd been waiting for. For years, Amanda had been chained and confined, unable to leave the house, but she had learned to endure. This time, however, she noticed something different. The door that usually locked her in was left slightly ajar. Perhaps it was a momentary lapse in Castro's vigilance, a mistake that would change everything. In that instant, Amanda knew she had to act. Despite the fear coursing through her veins, Amanda mustered the strength to break free from her chains. She wasn't sure how long this opportunity would last, but she knew it was her only chance. With her heart racing, she rushed to the front door. When she saw the door open, she didn't hesitate. She pushed it wide open, screaming for help, hoping someone would hear her cries. It was at that moment that she found the courage to scream out to the world that she had been held captive for years. Amanda Berry was finally free. Her scream wasn't just a cry for help. It was a declaration of survival. As Amanda stumbled into the yard, her voice echoed through the neighborhood. That's when she caught the attention of Charles Ramsey, a man who lived nearby. At first, he was unsure of what was happening, but Amanda's desperation was clear. She rushed to him, and in a desperate plea for safety, she told him, "I've been kidnapped, and I've been missing for 10 years. Charles Ramsey didn't hesitate. He quickly helped Amanda get to safety, and then, in a moment of clarity and urgency, Amanda was able to call 911. The operator was shocked as she listened to Amanda's voice, still trembling but strong, as she told them the shocking details of her captivity. "I'm free now. I'm free now. Help me," she said, her voice trembling with emotion. And then, she told the 911 dispatcher, "I've been kidnapped, and I've been missing for 10 years. The dispatcher stayed on the line as Amanda explained how she had managed to escape, urging her to remain calm. As the police arrived at the scene, Amanda's hope became a reality. The authorities were now involved, and the rescue had begun. What Amanda didn't know in that moment was that her escape would set off a chain of events that would bring freedom to her fellow captives, Michelle Knight and Gina DeJesus. Once Amanda was safely in police custody, the investigation into the house where she had been held captive shifted into high gear. The police quickly arrived at the Castro home, where the horror of the situation began to unfold. Officers went inside the house and began searching for the other women who had been held captive for so long. They went to the same basement where Amanda had been held. It was there that they found Michelle Knight and Gina DeJesus, still trapped, still living in the same horrific conditions they had endured for years. Michelle, who had been in captivity the longest, and Gina, who had been trapped for nearly a decade, were finally free. The moment was overwhelming for the women and for their families. After years of torment and uncertainty, their rescue was nothing short of a miracle. The police worked quickly to ensure that the women were safe and that Castro's house of horrors was no longer their prison. The aftermath of the escape was both surreal and emotional. Michelle, Amanda, and Gina were reunited with their families, who had been through a decade of fear, loss, and unimaginable pain. For Amanda Berry, the escape was both a physical and emotional release. It was an end to the daily torment, but it also marked the beginning of a long healing journey. The police investigation revealed the true scale of the horror that had unfolded inside Ariel Castro's home. It was soon discovered that Castro had kept the women isolated, never allowing them any freedom or contact with the outside world. Castro's control over his victims was absolute, but despite the years of suffering, the women had never given up hope, and now they were free. As the truth about the women's captivity spread, the public was left in shock and disbelief. Ariel Castro was arrested and charged with numerous offenses, including kidnapping, rape, and the murder of Michelle Knight's unborn child. His trial became a public spectacle, with many people expressing outrage at the horrific treatment the women had endured. Ultimately, Castro pled guilty to all charges and was sentenced to life in prison without the possibility of parole, plus 1,000 years for the other crimes he had committed. But just a month into his sentence, Castro's life would come to an end when he was found dead in his prison cell from an apparent suicide. In the years following their rescue, Michelle, Amanda, and Gina worked to rebuild their lives. Each of them found a path toward healing, though the scars of their captivity would never fully fade. Amanda went on to have a daughter, Michelle changed her name to Lily, and Gina became an advocate for missing persons. Their courage and resilience became an inspiration to many, and their story sparked a national conversation about the dangers of abduction, human trafficking, and the strength of the human spirit. As the first wave of shock set in from Amanda Berry's dramatic escape, the authorities moved quickly. Amanda's 911 call had sounded like something straight out of a nightmare. A woman, desperate for freedom, telling a dispatcher, "I've been kidnapped, and I've been missing for 10 years. The urgency in her voice rang through the dispatcher's ears, and that was all they needed to know. The authorities sprang into action immediately. The Cleveland Police Department knew they had to act fast. Within minutes of the call, multiple patrol cars arrived at the scene, racing toward Ariel Castro's home. They secured the perimeter of the property, and the search began. Inside the house, the officers knew they were about to uncover something beyond their worst fears. Inside the home, Amanda was already safe, and the officers began to search for the other victims. They combed through the dark, dingy basement where Amanda had been held captive. The women were locked away, isolated in rooms that could have been straight from a prison cell. The police's primary concern was ensuring the victims were physically okay and could begin the process of being freed. When Michelle Knight and Gina DeJesus were found, there was a mix of relief and horror. The house that Ariel Castro had claimed as his home was no longer a refuge. It had become a tomb for his victims, and the walls were about to reveal the horrors they had endured for years. With the victims safely in the hands of police, the focus turned to the man responsible for this unimaginable tragedy, Ariel Castro. Authorities moved quickly to arrest him. He was taken into custody without incident, but the shock surrounding the arrest reverberated throughout the community. Ariel Castro, once a seemingly upstanding man, a former school bus driver, was now revealed to be the man behind the abductions, the rapes, and the unimaginable suffering of these three women. The community was stunned by the revelation. For years, Castro had hidden in plain sight, his actions masked by a calm, almost normal facade. But now, his dark secret was exposed for the world to see. He was charged with kidnapping, rape, and other crimes, including the murder of Michelle Knight's unborn child, whom he had fathered through his abuse. Castro pled guilty to 937 counts, and in the end, He was sentenced to life in prison without the possibility of parole, plus 1,000 additional years for his other crimes. The case made national headlines, and the entire community was left in disbelief that such horror had taken place right under their noses for over a decade. Once the women were safe, they began the difficult and emotional process of sharing their stories. In their testimony, Michelle, Amanda, and Gina described the horrors they had faced during their years in captivity. Their accounts were chilling: years of forced isolation, constant physical and emotional abuse, and the crushing knowledge that no one was looking for them. Michelle Knight, who had been held for the longest period, gave a powerful account of the extreme isolation she had endured. She shared the harrowing details of how she was subjected to constant abuse and manipulation. Her pain was evident, but so was her resilience. Michelle's journey was the longest, but she found the strength to survive when so many would have given up. After her release, Michelle chose to change her name to Lily, starting fresh and reclaiming her identity. Amanda Berry, who had been abducted at just 16 years old, described how she had been separated from the world for nearly a decade. Amanda's account was filled with moments of fear, but also with a sense of hope that she had never lost. Amanda would go on to give birth to a daughter while in captivity, something that gave her the strength to keep going. Gina DeJesus, only 14 when she was abducted, described the horror of not knowing if she would ever see her family again. Her parents had never given up hope, and now Gina was finally home. But the trauma of her experience was something that would take years to heal. The emotional toll these women had endured was immeasurable, but despite the trauma and the scars left by their years in captivity, each woman had an incredible strength that allowed them to rebuild their lives. Amanda, Michelle, and Gina would go on to advocate for others who had been abducted or trafficked, sharing their stories to help others heal. The bond the women shared grew stronger in the years that followed their release. They became symbols of hope, showing the world that no matter how dark the situation may seem, there is always light at the end of the tunnel. Their strength, resilience, and ability to survive against all odds would forever change the way the world viewed kidnapping, abuse, and the incredible strength of the human spirit. As Ariel Castro's arrest made headlines, the nation awaited the trial of the man who had subjected Michelle Knight, Amanda Berry, and Gina DeJesus to years of unimaginable horror. What unfolded in the courtroom was both chilling and shocking, as Castro's behavior defied all expectations. In the courtroom, Ariel Castro appeared calm, almost eerily composed, as if he were a man detached from the gravity of the charges against him. The families of the victims, sitting in the courtroom, had to witness the man who had stolen their loved ones' lives for a decade. His demeanor was cold, almost indifferent to the devastation he had caused. Castro's trial became a spectacle in itself. At one point, Castro offered a bizarre statement in which he claimed that his actions were not entirely his fault, blaming his abductions on his sexual addiction and poor decisions. He tried to portray himself as someone who had done these things because of an addiction that could somehow explain the abduction and brutal abuse of these women. This statement shocked everyone in the courtroom, including the victims' families, as Castro's failure to take full responsibility for his actions was painfully evident. What made the courtroom drama even more chilling was how Castro refused to accept full responsibility for the horrors he inflicted on the women. Despite the overwhelming evidence against him, including the women's testimonies, he continued to display a strange lack of remorse. He seemed to view his actions through the lens of justification, as though he could somehow mitigate the severity of his crimes. In the end, Castro entered a plea deal. Rather than face a lengthy trial, he chose to plead guilty to 937 charges, including kidnapping, rape, and the murder of Michelle Knight's unborn child. This plea deal saved the women from having to endure the traumatic experience of a full trial. The guilty plea meant that Castro would not be eligible for the death penalty, but it also meant that he would face life in prison for his crimes. The plea deal was bittersweet. While it ensured that he would be locked away for the rest of his life, it also revealed the depths of his depravity. The fact that he was willing to plead guilty to nearly 1,000 charges made it clear just how long his reign of terror had lasted, and how many crimes he had committed. On August 1, 2013, Castro was formally sentenced. The courtroom was filled with emotion as the victims' families, along with Michelle, Amanda, and Gina, finally had the opportunity to speak their minds. They spoke of the emotional and physical scars their loved ones bore and how their lives had been shattered by Castro's actions. In the end, the judge sentenced Ariel Castro to life in prison without the possibility of parole. In addition to this, he was given 1,000 years, a symbolic sentence that ensured he would never again see the light of day. It was a sentence meant to reflect the immeasurable pain he had caused, and it was one that ensured he would never hurt anyone again. However, there was one final twist in this already tragic tale. Despite the weight of his sentence, Castro's story did not end in the courtroom. Just a month after being sentenced to life in prison, Ariel Castro was found dead in his cell. The cause of death was ruled as suicide, and it became clear that, even though he had been given a life sentence, Castro had chosen to take matters into his own hands rather than live out the consequences of his actions. Castro's death was a tragic and unsettling conclusion to the case. It left many wondering what kind of person would choose to take their own life rather than face the years of reflection and punishment for their crimes. But for the women and their families, it meant that Ariel Castro would never again be able to inflict harm on anyone. While his death closed one chapter, it didn't diminish the pain or the loss that Michelle, Amanda, and Gina had suffered for so many years. While Castro's death marked the end of the trial, the journey for Michelle, Amanda, and Gina was far from over. In the years that followed their escape, each woman began to rebuild their life, seeking healing from the unimaginable trauma they had endured. They would forever carry the weight of their experiences, but they were also determined to use their voices to help others who had suffered in similar ways. The case of Ariel Castro is one of the darkest chapters in Cleveland's history, but it also serves as a reminder of the strength of the human spirit. Michelle, Amanda, and Gina overcame the unthinkable, emerging as symbols of hope and resilience. Their courage continues to inspire, showing the world that even in the face of evil, survival and strength can triumph. In the years following their dramatic rescue, Michelle Knight, Amanda Berry, and Gina DeJesus have worked tirelessly to rebuild their lives and raise awareness about the horrors of abduction and abuse. While the scars of their captivity may never fully heal, they have found ways to turn their painful experiences into a source of strength, advocacy, and hope for others. Michelle Knight, the first woman to be abducted by Ariel Castro, made the deeply personal decision to change her name after her escape. Michelle Knight became Lily Rose Lee, a name that symbolizes her rebirth and her determination to move forward with her life. For Michelle, changing her name was an act of liberation, a way to free herself from the darkness of her past and begin anew. Lily Rose Lee has become a powerful advocate for victims of abuse and abduction. In the years since her rescue, she has worked to raise awareness about the trauma faced by victims of violence and has advocated for improved support systems for survivors. Michelle/Lily has used her voice to speak out about the importance of helping victims heal and to promote the message that survival is possible, no matter how harrowing the circumstances. Through her advocacy, she has helped bring attention to the urgent need for resources for victims of trauma, empowering others to come forward and share their stories. In addition to her advocacy, Lily Rose Lee has also written a memoir, sharing her personal journey and the strength it took to survive those dark years. Her story is one of resilience and determination, inspiring countless people who are facing their own battles to keep fighting, no matter the odds. Amanda Berry, the woman who made the daring escape that led to the rescue of the others, has also worked to reclaim her life. After years of unimaginable abuse, Amanda became an outspoken advocate for victims of kidnapping, abuse, and violence. In 2015, Amanda published a memoir, Finding Me, A Decade of Darkness, A Life Reclaimed, in which she opened up about her life before, during, and after her captivity. Her book became a bestseller, offering readers an inside look at her harrowing experience and the strength she found to survive. But more importantly, it allowed Amanda to take control of her narrative, something that was stolen from her during the years of captivity. Amanda's memoir not only describes the unimaginable horrors she endured, but also showcases her incredible courage and resilience. She has also become a tireless advocate for other victims, working to raise awareness about the long-term effects of trauma and the need for justice and accountability for those who commit such heinous crimes. Like Amanda and Michelle, Gina DeJesus has worked to rebuild her life after her traumatic abduction. Although she was the youngest of the three women, Gina found incredible strength in her ability to persevere. Gina, too, has become an advocate for missing persons and victims of violence, using her platform to speak out about the importance of never giving up hope. She has become involved in campaigns that aim to bring awareness to the ongoing issue of missing children and adults, and has spoken about the importance of community support in helping families cope with the disappearance of a loved one. Gina's journey has been one of both healing and empowerment. Despite the darkness of her past, she is determined to use her voice for good and to advocate for those who are still missing or struggling to recover from similar traumatic experiences. For the families of Michelle, Amanda, and Gina, the rescue of their loved ones brought immense relief after years of uncertainty and heartbreak. For Amanda Berry's family, the joy of knowing that she was alive and safe was indescribable, especially after the devastating loss of her mother, who passed away during Amanda's captivity. Gina DeJesus's family also found solace in knowing their daughter was finally home, after years of searching and hoping for her safe return. And Michelle Knight's family, while devastated by the trauma she had endured, was ultimately overjoyed to welcome her back. While the relief of their loved one's return was profound, the road to recovery for these families was far from easy. The women's traumatic experiences had left lasting scars, and their families understood that their healing process would be long and difficult. Nevertheless, the families stood by them every step of the way, offering love and support as they navigated the complicated emotions of survival and rebuilding. As Michelle, Amanda, and Gina continue to rebuild their lives, they have found strength in their shared experiences. The bond they share is unbreakable, a symbol of survival, resilience, and the power of the human spirit. They have come to understand that while their lives were forever changed by the abuse they suffered, they have the power to rewrite their futures. Their advocacy and efforts to help other victims show the world that even in the face of unspeakable horrors, hope, healing, and redemption are possible. The story of Michelle Knight, Amanda Berry, and Gina DeJesus is one of unimaginable horror and heartbreaking tragedy. These women endured years of abuse, isolation, and pain. But despite the darkness they faced, they found the strength to survive, escape, and share their stories with the world. Their courage and resilience serve as a reminder that even in the face of unspeakable horrors, the human spirit can endure. Their journey is a testament to the power of hope, determination, and the unwavering will to survive. Though their lives were forever changed, they have used their experiences to advocate for others, to raise awareness about the dangers of abduction and abuse, and to encourage healing for all survivors. This case is a stark reminder of the importance of staying vigilant and aware of the signs of abuse, and to never give up hope for those who are still missing. We all have a responsibility to support victims and ensure that justice is served. To those who are suffering in silence, know that there is always hope and help available. You are not alone. If you found this story moving and inspiring, please share this video, subscribe, and stay informed about similar stories. Together, we can make a difference, raise awareness, and support those who need it most.